Antrich und Ehre, was ich dir noch angesäche, so bist du ihr aller Ehre. Was ist Wundes hier geschäche? Dass ein Magd ein Kind gebar, ihre über aller Engel schar. Was das nicht ein Wunder gab.
This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary holy land from the heathen. This is Dan Baltic.
And this is Matt Pegas.
And this is the Masculine Urge to episode, wherein we are going to discuss the masculine urge to make good art, basically. And in this vein, there have been a couple of recent kind of news hooks here. One of which is an article from the New York Times by a non-binary op-ed writer called "This Isn't Your Old Toxic Masculinity," and this is something that we both kind of stumbled across, and it's an article that is saying how the recent emphasis, or not recent, but like in the past few decades or what have you, for men to express their emotions has become toxic, but like not in a way that it like men are becoming pussies and that's a bad thing. That's not what they mean. And when I say they, I guess I'm I'm
using the appropriate
yes.
pronoun. Technically correct. Yes.
Well, that's not what they mean here. What they mean is that men, by sharing on stuff like incel forums and stuff like that, and legitimately talking about their problems in this feminist and kind of paused out society that we live in right now, that actually men actually talking about their problems is toxic, and
yes, it's taken a toxic turn, supposedly. The New York Times piece, I guess, is by someone called Alex McElroy, not a writer I've ever heard of, but he or they, basically, as you said, get into, I guess, what is it called? This isn't your old toxic masculinity. It has taken an insidious new form, gets into kind of your typical post-Gamergate spiel about how, just about the toxicity of the sort of beta character, who I maybe this is an oversimplification, but like maybe in the 90s through the early 2000s had kind of gotten a little bit of a pass by feminists, so it kind of assumed to be a kind of ally, and then in more recent years and over the past about 10 years now, the notion of the sort of nerdy or beta male as possessing a beta rage and perhaps even more toxic rage, their own toxic masculinity, has kind of come much more into vogue. That's been the case for a few years. This article, this op-ed from the New York Times, kind of pushes The Rock a little further down the path by saying even post Me Too. So now we're talking about the last 3 or 4 years. There's been a noticeable uptick in I guess this kind of behavior, or in men acting in these kinds of ways. They definitely use the I word, talking about incel forums and what have you, quite a bit. But also, more generally, it's more generally an attempt to sort of sanction and police. It's like, obviously, the notion that men should open up and be more vulnerable is a talking point of the left. But now that we're post that moment, now it's time to police how and when that happens, and what is okay to say and what not to say. It was my read on the article.
So yeah, crucially, men are being told to be more vulnerable and express their fears. But when they do so, they sometimes convey politically inappropriate ideas and politically inconvenient truths. And so it's they want you to express yourself and be vulnerable, but not to say anything that is offensive, and thus to not actually express yourself and not actually be vulnerable. So the actual problems of men in society today, of being
honestly, not that you or I are incels, but I mean, we can talk about the sex recession. It's the numbers show this to be real. I mean, there's other issues too that the article gets into, but basically, there is a real problem with men in society, and no, it probably isn't all women's fault or anything. I'm not necessarily co-signing on to the most extreme incel rhetoric here, but nevertheless, that there is a problem with a sexual recession affecting men especially, and basically the left really can't talk about that, or they have to put on kid gloves, and before they even really begin to get into the meat of the issue, they have to give all kinds of disclaimers about how this isn't a real issue, or how men should not expect sex, and how there's how 90% of it's toxic.
I mean, the problem is the sexual revolution and its aftermath has been really a bad thing for society and for men and for women, and
especially for the middle class, like this kind of like the middle class of beta males. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially for kind of average Joe.
So it's been a bad thing, and so it's a basic pillar of our neoliberal and liberal order, that the sexual revolution was a glorious good thing that gives women control over their sexual lives, and gives men the ability to also not conform to those pesky societal norms of having a wife and kids. Which essentially this whole post-war liberal project of destroying social order rests upon the sexual revolution and then other various revolutions that took place in the 60s. Mm-hmm. And so to express any misgiving, I mean, legitimately, half of all men, more than half of all men, are probably doing much worse than they would have 50 years ago. And the same goes for women, because a hypergamous hypergamous society is really only good for the top tier of men and women. So so legitimately there are many people who are dissatisfied, but they have created a problem for themselves by saying that wanting men and these so-called beta men or whatever to express their fears, and they thought that these men were going to say things like, I feel so hurt when alpha dudes call me a pussy, but no, it's like, oh, I feel so hurt that I never get laid because society is fucked. That's not
Yeah.
what they expected the men who share their emotions to say. But
I don't know. I don't know what they expected, but it's certainly not what they wanted. And I mean, this article was interesting for me. Again, the timeline is interesting for me because it specifically says post Me Too, so it's specifically the last 3-4 years in which I've been much more cued into this stuff than I would have been before. And there was an interesting moment, kind of between 2016 and 2018, sort of post Trump but pre Me Too. Where there was, I recall, a lot of soul-searching going on among certain, probably in most cases, somewhat smarter or more open-minded, even, ironically, factions of the left and of the liberal establishment, where they were talking about such notions as the future of whiteness was one, and also like the future of masculinity. Given the sort of shock of Trump's victory, for them, but also before things like Me Too, and then later the 2020, BLM stuff, sort of like remade the stakes so that showing any degree of any those Me Too and BLM, these sort of astroturfed, I think, social events, sort of made it back to the position we're in now, where you really can't even talk about this stuff if there's any sense that you're tunneling towards, the Trumpists, you're basically seen as a traitor and as evil. We're kind of back to that. But I do recall in 2016, 2017, there was a moment where certain people were talking about these kinds of notions, such as the future of whiteness and the future of masculinity. This article vaguely reminded me of some. It was probably also a New York Times op-ed. I don't remember it off the top of my head. But it might have been called "The Boys Aren't Okay." I'll look it up after this.
That's I think I know that was an Atlantic article.
It was probably an Atlantic. Atlantic. The Atlantic, which it's not a publication that I like necessarily, but they're sort of the king of.
Occasionally, they have like a good
right.
They let a good one through.
There's more nuance. In fact, the so-called sex recession that I'm citing, I still think there's an Atlantic article. It's probably the best source about that. So yeah, the Atlantic, will acknowledge some of these things, even though they're pretty squarely left establishment. But I recall that Atlantic article. There was other ones as well, and there was this, the conversation was addressed. That men, especially younger men, are doing a lot less well than they once were, whether because of the incel thing or because of demonstrable facts like that they're not going to college at nearly the same rate, that they're not succeeding, that they're dropping out. These things were addressed, and these things have only gotten worse over the past few years, so we're probably going to see more of these op-eds like Alex McElroy's, because the problem is becoming so impossible to ignore.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. These articles, I appreciate them. I shouldn't even say that, because I don't want to sound like I'm trying to appeal to New York Times op editors. It's not like high up on my agenda to do that. But on some level, I appreciate where they're coming from. What they're trying to do is to open up this conversation about, being a man is not just a construct of privilege, and being white is not just a construct of privilege, perhaps even more controversially. I appreciate, the sort of the addressing of that line. And, before I got red-pilled, quote-unquote, I was and I was still sort of liberal and trying to make sense of all of this, that kind of thinking appealed to me. So I guess I'm case in point that if there's people out there who think that this kind of thing can be a slippery slope, yes, it can be.
Yeah.
Basically, I'm just, giving a lot of context here, but the one thing that op-eds like this one that we're talking about, and like, those older pieces that I'm talking about, the one thing that they'll never do is get over. They'll like go so far in acknowledging what the problems might be and how there's nuance to them, but they'll never let go of the basic premise that masculinity is basically a pathology, and that it's something that should be reduced in modern society. That masculinity is itself the problem. It's like, yes, we'll acknowledge your pain, but you have to acknowledge that your pain comes from masculinity, not a lack of masculinity, but rather that your problem comes from buying into, in their parlance, buying into like this social construct of privilege that you're unwilling to let go of. They can come across as very empathetic people, willing to, maybe even talk to an incel, but they'll never let go of that premise. And maybe some of them will, but they'll never do it in the New York Times.
Yeah.
So it's a fundamental philosophical disagreement that I have.
So I think crucially it is true that things are getting worse, and the types, the tenor of the conversation and like what you're allowed to say is less and less. So like now, men are not really allowed to legitimately complain about their problems at all. And as you note, maybe 10 years ago, there was more kind of lip service paid to it. But in the past, even before that, you did have, and this is kind of going to segue into the main topic of the episode, of the Masculine Urge 2 episode. You had mainstream entertainment that dealt with masculinity in a nuanced and complex way, that looked at the positives and looked at the negatives. And so what we're going to talk about on the pod today mostly is Neil LaBute's first film, one of his very first plays, which was adapted into a film by him called In the Company of Men. And this made a splash when it came out in the late 90s, in 1997. And it is kind of a dark comedy, a comedy that examines literally male company and male camaraderie. And also it's a play on words because it's about the office place. So it's about office politics and how masculinity interacts with office politics. And what I think is really interesting here is that, and just to, circle back for a moment, these types of movies, there used to be a lot of them. So like you had In the Company of Men. Other ones that come to mind are Glengarry Glen Ross by David Mamet.
And that's probably one that we'll get into In the Company of Men, which for as much as I love Glengarry Glen Ross, I think In the Company of Men may be even more riotously funny. But for our audience, more of them are probably going to be familiar with Glengarry Glen Ross. So if you want to talk about, the tone of In the Company of Men
is very
I don't know what was going on. I don't know what was going on in the world of theater in the 80s or the 90s, but you have a few of these people like Mamet and Neil LaBute who were writing these plays that explored masculinity in really interesting ways. But go on. I just wanted to, note that the tone is very much the same.
Oh, yeah, very. Mamet and LaBute kind of like, I'm not going to say interchangeable, but stylistically very similar playwrights.
Thematically.
Similar, thematically. Yeah. And so like a couple of others, Your Friends and Neighbors, that's another Neil LaBute one. Roger Dodger, that was a film. I actually don't know who wrote it, but it's another.
I don't know if I've seen that one.
Swimming with Sharks, which I think we're probably both familiar with.
No, actually.
Okay, so Swimming with Sharks is it's kind of a portrait of masculinity at work in Hollywood entertainment industry stuff. So stuff that's we have some familiarity with. To not go into much great detail there, but so what I really wanted to say here is that mainstream entertainment used to deal with these issues, And now you want to see a movie on Netflix or whatever that, deals with masculinity in an honest way, that looks at the positives and negatives. You won't. The only place you're going to find it is stuff like, Frog Twitter, incel forums. You're going to find it in outside of the beaten path. You're not going to find it in mainstream entertainment. You're going to find it on pods like ours. You're going to find it on like weird, web, videos and YouTube series and stuff like that. And so, like, you
maybe Joe Rogan, too. Just throwing it out there.
No,
I mean, that's the
Rogan,
most.
Yeah.
But that's a podcast. Podcasts are kind of like this last bastion of I don't know, right wing discourse. That's another topic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, and I'll be a normie and say, in addition to all the films that you listed, I'll be a normie and say even some more mainstream ones also kind of do this, and it almost hurts how normie it is to say, but American Psycho and Fight Club and even what's it called, American Beauty, although that one ends in a sort of some would say that's pretty paused, but nevertheless. Even so, the films and plays you mentioned are kind of the slightly more down the ladder cultural artifacts. But even some of the really mainstream shit at that time, but those three movies I listed, American Psycho, American Beauty, and Fight Club, I think they're all, if they're not all from the same year, they're from the same 2 years, 1998 through 2000. For whatever reason, that's a high watermark for exploring some of this stuff. I don't know what it is, but you know what? As much as a normie as it makes me to say, I do like all three of those movies.
Oh no, they're really good. Fight Club is probably one of my favorite movies. I loved it when I saw it. Yeah, of
course. Yeah,
and it's it's just like, I think every man from every millennial had a Tyler Durden phase where they're I'm kind of like Tyler Durden or something like that. And they used to make movies that explored masculinity in nuanced ways. And, it's interesting to note that Fight Club ultimately, it's concluded that Tyler Durden was, a toxic character. And he, the main character literally had to, essentially kill himself to get rid of Tyler Durden. And American Psycho, it's
American Psycho. He's a obvious villain, and then as I said, American Beauty is fairly liberal in its ultimate messaging, but the messaging doesn't even necessarily matter as much as the basic and honest exploration that occurs. And as you said, that's what is missing in modern entertainment. You don't have that nuanced villain. You also don't really have that nuanced hero either, by the way. So what you're left with is there's still a lot of very masculine sort of testosterone. Well, there's at least some masculine testosterone laden films that come out. What's his name? Why is it not coming to me? Who played Qui-Gon Jinn in Star Wars?
Liam Neeson.
Whatever the Liam Neeson movie. These movies still get made, but they're just kind of your basic bitch. Man does something heroic.
Yeah.
He's an obvious alpha. And then on the other hand, you have what I like to call, what maybe we've even called on this podcast, the Guillermo del Toro style villain. And Shape of Water was a horrible movie, but what a...
Proud to say I've never seen it.
Yeah, I've only saw half of it, but the villain in the white male blonde villain in that is just such a masterpiece of fulfilling this archetype of the straw man villain of a completely unnuanced, cartoonish, white male oppressor, basically.
Yeah.
That I think has, in my mind, has warranted the invention of the expression the Guillermo del Toro style villain.
And so contrast that with another blonde white male. I don't know if we're going to call him villain, but the main character in the Company of Men, his name is Chad, and
Right.
it's it's very, because we were watching this together, and when
Yes.
we noticed that, like, I had seen it before, you had not seen it yet, and when I had forgotten that the character's name was Chad, but this is 1997. It's before all the Chad memes, before everything. But like, wow, did he get it right? Because this Chad character is, the kind of archetypal Chad in the Company of Men. Wouldn't you say so?
For
Matt?
sure. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's played by Aaron
Eckhart.
Eckhart, who is very 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 masculine, very blonde. I think he just got cast in another movie, by the way, and he still looks pretty good at like 60. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
Very very Chadly guy. And yeah, I don't even. Yeah, you were saying you don't even think when we watched it, you hadn't even remembered that his name was Chad. But I mean, he's straight out of the meme pages. But he sort of plays opposite a more beta character. I don't remember the actor's name.
No, yeah,
But
I don't.
I mean, do you want to?
Yeah,
you know
let's
the play a little better than me.
Briefly
Yeah.
run down the plot for everyone. So the plot is these two guys, Chad and Howard. They're both in middle management. Howard is technically Chad's boss, but Howard is clearly the beta to Chad's alpha. He, is. But there is an odd relationship where there is a technical hierarchy in that he's kind of Chad's boss. So Chad kind of defers to him formally, but not actually. And so they have a kind of friendship, but it's clear that that one character, Howard, is the titular boss, and Chad is kind of like the actual alpha. And so in that context of that type of friendship, they are both feeling burned by women. Chad's wife left him, and Howard's fiance left him. And so they bond over a shared plan to find a woman, and they will both date her at the same time and seduce her, and then when she falls in love with one of them, they will break up with her both at the same time and leave her heartbroken. And this will make them feel good, because hurting people can sometimes make you feel good. Not that I recommend that. But
Yeah, and specifically seeking revenge against women in this Elliot Rodger sort of way.
exactly, yeah, and that's a good, actually for all that kind of incel rage and stuff like that. This is an excellent, you can see the current for it even then, and you can see that they both resent kind of the aftermath of the sexual revolution, and they resent the realities of the dating marketplace, because they've both been left, and probably that wouldn't have happened in an earlier era. And so they want to they feel that Elliot Rodger resentment, and they want to take it out on this anonymous woman who they will find. And they find her in the office where they work, and she is, to make it even more kind of extreme, she's deaf. And so there's a plot element that she can't, she can't hear them, and she speaks in a rather funny manner. And
yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about another thing that would not make it into a movie, it's a actress who can hear just fine doing, and I don't want to get us canceled here, but Chad in the movie calls it her retard voice.
Yeah, no, I mean, we can say
way to put it.
voice. That's totally fine.
Yeah, it's a quote from the movie, and but the actress is not deaf and does not have that voice. So that's another somewhat humorous element that would not have made it into a movie today. But yeah, no, that's the setup, and I don't think we're really going to be able to talk about it without sort of spoiling.
Oh yeah, no, we gotta spoil it. I mean, so
if you're like me, right? If you're like me, and Dan explained this movie to me maybe 6 months ago or so, and I immediately thought it sounded like a very hilarious setup. So if you share that reaction and want to make sure that you actually see the movie, you can turn this off now. But we're gonna have to kind of reveal what I guess you could call the bigger twist at the end of the movie in order to really go forth.
So what happens is they both start dating this deaf woman, and perhaps somewhat predictably she falls for Chad, and she does not really fall for Howard, and it results.
It plays out pretty much how Hartiste,
where Howard, he falls in love with her, and he's pissed off that he was supposed to be like in league with Chad, and they were going to break up with her at the same time, but he wants this woman, and she has chosen Chad over him. So he thought he was going to get revenge, but really he's just getting punched in the face again. And so...
Right. I mean, inadvertently, it basically plays out exactly how someone like Hartiste would have predicted. It starts off, and in many ways is, all about hurting this deaf girl from their office. But... inadvertently, or as we'll see, perhaps not totally inadvertently, it's also a little social experiment. You have a woman who's dating two men consecutively. How does that go? Who comes out on top? And it basically plays out, and she's not some, crazy hypergamous bitch or anything. She's just a normal girl who's deaf. But she ends up, going for Chad pretty hard.
Yeah.
And not going for Howard.
And so it results in a pretty, hilarious scene where Chad, breaks up with her and reveals now I'm getting the order wrong. Howard reveals the whole plot to her because he falls in love with her. And
right.
She doesn't want to believe him. She doesn't want to believe that Chad could be so evil. And so she confronts Chad about this after having slept with Chad. And Chad tries to, pretend that it's not true. But then he says something to the effect of, "I can't even keep a straight face." And he breaks it to her. And and so she's heartbroken, and Howard is also heartbroken and aggrieved, and so what the button on this movie, the denouement that delivers the real punch is Howard. He's very upset about the way this played out. He as a result gets his work slips up. He gets demoted. Chad gets promoted over him, and it works out very well for Chad, obviously. And so he for some reason, I forget why, stops by Chad's apartment, and he's there, and he realizes that Chad's wife is in the apartment, and so he asks him, did you get back together with her? And Chad says, "No, we never broke up. What are you talking about?" And so it's a very that devilish moment, the face of evil or whatever. It becomes apparent that Chad was lying from the very beginning. He was like, either this was like something just for his own diversion, for fun. It was a way to own Howard and own some random woman. But I mean, also it redounded to his personal benefit, and he got a promotion because his boss went off the rails. And
you're right.
Yeah, so this presents a really interesting character study in the character of Chad, because he, obviously there's much to be said about his toxicity. He's literally, I just said, the face of evil. So, like, he hatches an evil plan to, hurt his friend, to hurt some random woman, and, succeed. To get his own, achieve his own material advantage. But he also is undeniably, a charming character, an appealing character. And so this gets into the whole divide. And I think we're both familiar, and probably a lot of our audience is familiar with The Way of Men by Jack Donovan.
Yeah.
And so in that book, Donovan lays out that, being a man has nothing to do with being good. Nothing to do with it. Being a man boils down to courage, mastery, and some other shit. But, like, essentially, it boils down to, like, being good at dominating and, honoring.
Yeah, it's masculinity and the embodiment of masculinity and the embodiment of masculine power are, Jack Donovan is not necessarily an amoralist, but first and foremost, masculinity, the main topic of his interest, is in his reckoning, and in mine, I co-assign in this, an amoral category. It's simply a type of power. I don't think it reduces to something as simple and cartoonish as the desire to dominate, or as Bat might say, the desire to dominate space. I think there's more to it than that, but nevertheless, it's basically a drive, and basically related to, a physical sort of power, the masculine urge to do this, that, and the other thing. When Howard asks, I don't remember, I think he asked Chad, why did you do it? Chad simply says, because I could.
Oh, I forgot that line. That's a really good
line.
Right.
Yeah, so the masculine urge to do shit like that, what is that all about? That's maybe one of the questions we're dancing around. And maybe we don't have an exact answer. Maybe it's for diversion, pleasure, what have you. But the main point is, it is a masculine urge, and it is a notably masculine urge. No woman would ever do that, or even think of doing something like what Chad does in the company of men. And so, in that way, the play becomes this exploration of masculinity in a sort of objective, scientific. I won't say scientific, because we're in the realm of the humanities here pretty squarely, but nevertheless, an exploration of masculinity and the masculine urge to do certain things. And I have to again bring up American Psycho. Is also book and movie both is a great example of this too. Say what you will about Patrick Bateman, but his urges are all very, very masculine in nature, whether it's his care routine, which, the book was written by a gay man, and it seems a little metrosexual perhaps, but nevertheless, even that, is a form of, the masculine urge.
Yeah. So I think what this is boiling down to is, as you said, masculinity is an amoral thing. And it is, there are virtues and there are toxic elements of it, and the character of Chad presents both. And this is something that we don't really see in cinema today, in entertainment today. We don't see the kind of we don't see the tie between the toxic elements of masculinity and the virtuous elements, because society today wants to claim that the virtues of masculinity are in masculine, there's no such. I mean, after all, we live in a society
Right.
that says there's no such thing as a man or a woman. So if there's no such thing as a man or a woman, there's no such thing as a masculine virtue. There's just like there's being a Marvel hero, being an MCU superhero who could be and have doesn't even need a dick, who doesn't even like
Right.
has no gonads.
Yeah.
It's an entirely asexual proposition. And so the problem with these types of movies and why they're not made today is because they very correctly identify that masculine virtues, strength, mastery, even honor, the desire to honor commitments, because if you break your word, it reflects poorly on you as a man. That type of those virtues are inextricably tied to the vices of masculinity, and
Right.
it's all wound up in being a man. And that's something that society, doesn't. I think 10, 20 years ago, yeah, they said like men are, good at dominating, good at, taking risks, good at being kind of confident and what have you. But that comes also with assaults, rapes, all sorts of, antisocial behavior. And
Yeah, I mean, Dan, have you? I know I'm more of the Paglia head here, but have you heard the Camille Paglia quote? There is no female Jack the Ripper because there's no female Mozart.
Yes, yeah, and that's a very good one. That's exactly. There's
the basic connection between both. Not that we even need to impose any moralism or other on this conversation, but that there's but certainly we can agree that Jack the Ripper's not a great guy, and that Mozart, did great things. But that there's a connection between the vice and the virtue, or the ugly and the beautiful, to put it in purely aesthetic terms. That these things are inextricably connected. And yeah, today, again, going back to that philosophical premise behind any of these modern attempts to talk about, men being vulnerable, the basic premise is that, all of the vices, all of the toxicity, the drive to dominate. And by the way, it's coming back to me now, that op-ed that we started this conversation talking about, I think it ends, the last line is like, men need to let go of their drive to dominate. So that's obviously, an important concept here. But all of that is viewed as inherent to masculinity, which I suppose they take to be a social construct or some such bullshit. But none of the virtues connected to that. The drive to protect, shall we say, or to thrive. We don't even need to list these off for our audience necessarily. I think it's pretty obvious, not only to a right-wing audience, but to just any normal person. And indeed, the general public is probably not as far left on this as the establishment would like. Can recognize, the virtues of masculinity.
Yeah, and crucially, those virtues, and we discussed this in the notes. Well, one of the things that makes this so despicable is that the society, this liberal establishment, whatever, they want to they rely upon masculine virtues. They rely upon these virtues to essentially prop up society, but they don't want to give men their due. They don't want to say like, well, this is something that men are good at and men do. So like, the grunts who fight our wars, and like obviously most of our wars are currently misguided and probably shouldn't be happening, but nevertheless, but
historically, regardless of what you think of the American project, not even to get into that, all of this around us is the product of wars that have been fought and won.
Absolutely.
By men. So, and what revolt against the modern world, if you will, but we all live in it for now and enjoy at least some or many of its comforts.
Yeah. And so even beyond wars, stuff that like is like obviously like there's no one who is like, oh, yeah, we shouldn't be putting out fires. So like firefighters, like there are not too many female firefighters because women can't carry bodies out of buildings. And that is, but I mean, not just that. It's not just a physical thing. It's the courage to do it. There's a certain masculine urge, the masculine urge to be a hero. That is something that women just don't have. And we were talking about this before, and we were talking about this in the context of how I think I said that, like, as a little kid, as a teen or whatever, I would find myself fantasizing about dying in war. And it's like totally insane. Like, why would you fantasize about dying? Like, that's, that's, but not in a way like I was suicidal. I was not. Like, I fantasized about the honor and the glory of, dying for one's country or dying for one's tribe or whatever. And when I have misguidedly perhaps told women about this, they just don't understand it at all. They're like, well, why would you why would you like fantasize about that? That's like a terrible thing that, like, if it happened, would be horrible. But like men, we do, and there's the obvious evolutionary reason for this. You do need men to want on some deep level to sacrifice themselves for the group and have that kind of like that suicidal courage. And that is something that is very useful from a group evolutionary point of view perspective. Women just don't have it, and our societies are built upon it and continue to use it and utilize it. And if not in our wars, in firefighters, in in cops, breaking up disputes and stuff, and obviously policing today. Like, God, is there any profession that gets less respect than cops right now? I mean, obviously the thin blue line stuff, like there is a side of the right that backs cops firmly, and there's a huge question about federal law enforcement versus local law enforcement on our side of the internet. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anyone who thinks that like the average beat cop who is like stops some homeless person from brutalizing someone is a bad guy. Like there are people who do think that, but not not on our side of Twitter generally. So society relies upon the courage of men, the strength of men, and even like garbage men, men who literally pick up the trash.
No, even and coal miners and all these things like that. One of the kind of MRA, men's rights activist 1.0 talking points, and I'm not a big fan of that sort of Paul Elam type crowd. I think that's the guy's name. But some of their basic points about how men have not only the most heroic jobs, but also the shittiest jobs, and there's no drive to equalize representation in those jobs. That's always been, I think, a pretty good point. It kind of underscores, the silliness of the other side's project. But yeah, you're right. Even things like garbage men, which are, maybe it's a shitty job, but it's yet another example of a job that is completely necessary. It'll probably get automated eventually, so one day maybe this won't be as relevant of a topic. But in the meantime, it's very much, a completely necessary part of life that we all benefit from without even thinking about it.
Absolutely. And so, all of these virtues, all that society relies upon, they don't want to give credit where it's due. They don't want to say they're masculine virtues, and thus, movies that will inevitably draw the line, the link between the virtues and the toxic behaviors, the inappropriate or negative results of aggression, overconfidence. They can't allow these types of movies to come out because they will insist that there is such a thing as a masculine virtue, which cannot really be allowed. But we do see pushback from this. We do see, on our side of the internet, and I think we were discussing particularly that line from, and some people think he's a little Reddit, but Jordan Peterson,
right,
saying that in order to be a good man, you have to be capable of being a monster. And
yes,
I think we both agree that there's just a lot to that.
Definitely. By the way, do you know where he said that? It's such an interesting quote.
Should I don't. I'm sure he said it like a bunch of times. So.
Well, there's people sometimes say with Peterson, or I saw it said recently that when he was a university professor, he said fascinating stuff, and now that he has a world audience, he somehow just can't really put anything beyond platitudes out. That's neither here nor there. He must have said it somewhere, but yeah, it was before 12 Rules for Life. It was, and perhaps the golden age of Peterson. It's a phenomenal quote. It's one of those examples where you occasionally see the notion that someone like Bronze Age pervert or the manosphere generally is the subtext to Jordan Peterson. I think there's something to that. I will always defend Peterson, not. Again, I haven't even read his last book. 12 Rules for Life is mostly pretty trite, but it's clear that whatever philosophic disposition he's coming from, some of the positions he takes, they run deep. There's a deep running water there to some source of wisdom. And again, I always go back to, lo and behold, Camille Paglia, one of my intellectual heroes, has said positive things about his first book, Maps of Meaning, and it's clear that he's for lack of a better term, very based just on some of these matters of how do I even put it? I guess psychological matters, but that doesn't seem to get to the heart of it. He is a psychologist, but having to do with topics like nature and masculinity and what nature and masculinity and the way the world really works kind of beneath the sort of ideological or moral surface. Peterson's a visionary into that. And this quote, perhaps more than any other, really, is tremendous. When you think about that in the context of a movie like In the Company of Men or even American Psycho, it throws it into relief. I mean, these are movies which really exemplify totally toxic characters, characters who would be condemned morally by pretty much any society, but nevertheless, it's evident that there's a certain charisma to both of those characters, and it's just evident that there is a masculine, perhaps somewhat autistic energy that it's completely evident is not only responsible for atrocity, but also for all of the cultural products and civilizational developments that we cherish the most.
Yeah, and I think crucially, the quote, you have to be able to be a monster before you can be good. It illustrates the concept that that if you are not capable of aggressive violence, if you're not capable of attacking others, of being rapacious, then there arises a question: are you really good? Because okay, you're good, but you really couldn't be bad. You're not strong enough to be bad. It's not a choice. You're not good. You're weak. And
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very easy to be a conformist. It's very easy to just sort of go along. All power to people who are getting married and having children and all that. But it's not enough to simply just do that because it's an avenue that's available to you. You have to cultivate. Not to sound like another manosphere coon or something. I know it's kind of hard days for for this kind of talk. But you have to cultivate that kind of power in yourself. You have to, find the time, find the space to cultivate that kind of power, whether physically, via lifting and all of that, but mentally and intellectually as well. Otherwise, yeah.
And to bring it back to In the Company of Men, you really see it in the characters of Howard and Chad, because Howard, undeniably, he is, if you're going to go by like who professes, ultimately to, embrace moral virtue, that's Howard, because he disavows the plot. He's confesses to her. He's mad at Chad for, even doing this. But you walk away from the movie and you don't really feel that Howard is good. You feel that
he's weak. You might feel bad for him. You might relate to him, but you don't feel that he's morally good. In fact, what you feel is, not to get too philosophical and Nietzschean here, but what you feel is, to the extent that he makes appeals to morality, like, oh, I'm a good guy, I'm a nice guy, as opposed to Chad, you get the sense that he is using morality and these common sense or these day-to-day, these quotidian notions of a good and a bad guy, he's using it as a moral veneer for his weakness, in fact. Whereas Chad, I'm not going to morally praise him, but at the very least, he doesn't have any weakness to justify morally. He is, just embodying an amoral masculinity, as we talked about. And again, not to go on too much of a philosophical or Nietzschean tangent, but the way to think of this is that, masculinity as a force of nature, that you can embody as a man, is in and of itself amoral, and morality in a positive sense, these civilizational niceties in a positive sense are meant to channel that masculine energy to the highest precipice, and to bring out, for whatever reason agreed upon as like the greater good. That is a masculine morality. But what you get from a character like Howard, and it's relatable. I'm not saying that I'm super alpha man myself and that I haven't been guilty of that kind of appeal to being a nice guy type of thing in my life. But basically what you get there is finding different ways to justify weakness.
If he had been able to beat Chad, he wouldn't be talking about morality. He wouldn't be talking. He wouldn't be like, "Oh, this was." He would have, probably done what Chad did. And so let's look at what Chad actually did. And there's obviously, he hatched a plan to destroy the mind of his boss and the self-esteem of his boss, and used some random woman as cannon fodder, as a casualty of war. But let's look at it from a little bit of a more nuanced perspective. He has a wife. I think he has children. Mm-hmm. And the outcome of this is he got a promotion. And he's in bed with his wife, and he's he's obviously very nice to her. And he is good at being a man, and he used that to secure material benefit for him, which he will, give to his family. And, there is certainly a case to be made that it is, it's morally good to be good to everyone, but on a more primal level, there is a certain, moral goodness that, if it only extends to family, it only extends to those closest to you. Well, at least you did that. At least you secured the bag for your family.
Exactly. No, you see that with men, even like Trump. I don't want to valorize him too much, but There's another example of a man who has very good relationship with.
Yeah, there's a guy who definitely secured the bag.
There's a guy who definitely secured the bag. No, there's something to that. Nature, and by extent, just reality. Society as something that is not totally free from nature, but reality itself, perhaps, or it rewards that kind of masculine behavior, is what I'm trying to say. The last frame, if I'm not mistaken, in the Company of Men is Chad's expression as his wife is like going down on him.
Yes, yeah, I remember that.
So yeah, like Howard
reward.
leaves. Yeah, Howard leaves, and then she's like, "Oh, who are you talking to?" And he's like, "Oh, just some guy, some loser from work stopped by." And then she's like, "I'm horny," and sucks him up, and we see his expression. So, very concrete example of
Just some loser.
of his ultimate reward, and that movie reflects life. That kind of behavior is rewarded.
Yeah.
The man who's willing to go to that length and to exhibit, that level of power to get what he wants, will get what he wants. What he chooses to do with what he wants, maybe that's where the morality comes in, or maybe that's a more appropriate place to impose morality. What should be done with power once it is had, but. The original masculine urge, to exert your will, that is, that's something that precedes any morality, and that can lead you to acts both depraved and noble.
Yeah, there's loyalty to the group. But, there's that, there's always a tension with loyalty to yourself and to, your family unit. And so it's an interesting kind of concept because Donovan in The Way of Men, one of his, masculine virtues is honor. And so, like, someone who dishonors his commitments to his fellow men in the tribe, his gang, like, that is, that's, if you break honor, you're not embodying one of those masculine virtues.
Yeah.
Yet undeniably, and like there's an argument that Chad was, breaking masculine honor by scumbagging his boss because they're in a sort of tribe, a corporate tribe, but it doesn't really feel like he's, not being masculine.
Right.
I think honor is probably the weakest of the masculine virtues, and it's a kind of weird thing to say, but like you're really not gonna, and this is why it always ranks so hollow when people are like, well, Trump's not a real man because he's dishonorable, and it's like, yeah, but there's still something like really manly about like being like, no, I'm gonna get mine. And
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, one of the big, like, I guess, for lack of a better term, red pills while reading Jack Donovan, I remember just memorably talking about, like, how you may not agree with what the characters do in The Godfather, but would you really say they're not real men? And it kind of underscores the absurdity of imposing any of the more feel-good moral sentiments on masculinity. I think that there's tenets of masculinity which are different ways of exhibiting strength. And I think at times honor can be a way of exhibiting strength. Sure.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But transgressing that, just because we don't like what someone does doesn't make them any less of a man.
I'd say there's almost like, in a weird way, like a pass if you are, securing the bag for yourself or something. It's kind of like, well, did you really expect the guy not to backstab you? Like, maybe if you're like brothers, maybe if you're like, but if you're just kind of like teammates and someone has the chance to like pull a big win, like, yeah, I don't think that's really like, it's the weakest of masculine.
Yeah, right.
That's the new episode title: "The Weakest of the Masculine Virtues, Honor." You're right. We're against honor.
Or against honor, yeah. I mean, I guess you could also look at that in terms of the other sort of theme in the company of men, which would be a more leftist friendly interpretation, which is that it's about capitalism in some kind of way, about how this is what gets ahead. In a capitalist society, in the business world. I don't personally buy that because I think it has a lot more to do with economics. I think it gets to the very heart of the matter of what it is to be a man and to exist in society. But what they'd say, I don't think it's leftist because I think it's a valid line of interpretation, but it's leftist friendly, shall we say, would be that there is no tribe in the business world. You are always securing the bag ultimately for yourself, and companies are not real tribes. In short, that's they're atomized individuals competing, maybe forming temporary alliances. But I guess to sort of start to bring this all full circle, I mean, again, that New York Times piece that we started talking about ends with men need to give up the urge to dominate, and so give up the masculine urge to dominate, shall we say, and you have movies like In the Company of Men, where that masculine urge to dominate for its own sake is kind of explored as this toxic thing. But also, I think the other side to our argument is that that masculine urge to dominate is also, inexplicably linked toward the virtues of masculinity and certainly to creativity as well, and to the Peterson quote of it all: without the ability to be a Chad or to be a Patrick Bateman, you're not going to have the ability to be a truly great man. And I think that's kind of our ultimate thesis. And again, it's not something that all of these, I guess, well-meaning attempts on, the part of the New York Times op-ed section to start to figure out the problem. What is wrong with the boys? Why are they dropping out? Until they can, at least give some weight to that alternative position. I don't think they're going to get very far.
And to bring it back to our original mission statement, it's time for a return to the artistic masculine, to have movies like In the Company of Men back in the public discourse. And I don't think we're going to get there anytime soon on Netflix or in the mainstream. But we Frog Twitter and various esoteric spaces on the internet are producing really good content, and we're trying to get it out there.
Right. Yeah. Certainly, we're going to. Certainly, we at least have this podcast as a space to talk about this, and that's, I think, the first step. Is to create the space where people can talk about it, where people can listen, and give us feedback. Because again, it's not something you're going to find in the New York Times op-ed section. These basic realities, in this case, about what it is to be a man, are increasingly, forbidden topics, and we need to keep the torch of before we even, carry forth the torch of actually exerting, masculinity, just the mere existence of it, and to, not to forget about that is the first torch that we must carry.
Reclaiming the literary Holy Land
from the heathen.
And I think that's a good sign of it.
I think so.
All right.